Hey, it's Mike here, and today, does Hong Kong really have the longest life expectancy in the world because they eat the most meat in the world, as many meat lovers have claimed, including Beef Magazine, who titles their article, "Eat Beef for a Long, Healthy Life." You heard it, folks. Meat is the fountain of youth now. So we're going to investigate the sources behind this main claim. We're going to look at other research on life expectancy and meat consumption, and we're just going to learn more about Hong Kong. It's a very interesting place. We're going to look at how their diet has changed, what other lifestyle factors might influence their longevity, or if meat really is the elixir of life after all. And finally, we're going to crack open the new Vegan Strong Box for December. It's a box loaded with vegan goodies created for the purpose of keeping the amazing vegan strong bodybuilding team going through the pandemic. And I have a magical discount, so stay tuned for that. Everybody loves goodies, but let's just get right into the video looking at Hong Kong and life expectancy. They're often listed as the longest living country on Earth as of recent, but here's the thing. They are not quite a country. They are technically closer to a semi-sovereign city-state. All the politics of that are sensitive, and we don't need to go into it right now. But when you start including those, then you have to add places like Monaco, which is at 89 years life expectancy. Hong Kong is doing really good, depending on the source we're talking about, like 85 and a half year life expectancy, which of course beats the US. Now, you might have heard me say that the Adventist vegetarians are the longest living population on Earth, but we have a little bit of a data issue here, and that is that 84 and a half average life expectancy for those Adventists was back around 2000. And at that time, Hong Kong was barely breaking 80 years. But now, of course, they are technically surpassing it. We don't have new data for Adventist vegetarians, so it creates a bit of an annoying data scenario. And who knows, maybe we'll get an update on those Adventist longevity numbers, but we don't have them. So let's just go ahead and say, yes, Hong Kong is living a long time. However, what are the mainstream scientists saying about why Hong Kong is living longer? Well, there's a ton of factors here. I've yet to see any researchers point to meat as a real reason, but they do often point to healthcare. Their healthcare in 2018 was ranked as the most efficient in the world. And from this paper, on the whole, Hong Kong leads the world in medical/health service systems. And yes, everybody has access to their public healthcare system. And just to put things into perspective here, visits are usually from around $6 to $13 US, with medications costing $1, and it's about $15 for an overnight stay. But most importantly, if you can't afford it, you can have the costs waived. Far cry from people in the US who are deathly afraid of going into the hospital because they might go bankrupt. That leads to tens of thousands of deaths here, and they also had programs like lowering smoking in Hong Kong. They're down to about 11%, which is half the global average, about half as much as their neighbors in Japan. And we're actually doing pretty well at around 14%, but they still beat us. The next huge point is money. Hong Kong is a very wealthy city with a very high proportion of super rich people, and coupling this with actually having accessible healthcare is, of course, going to lead to longevity. And just rich cities in general have longer lifespans. I mean, look at San Francisco. Rich city lifespan, about 83 and a half years, so not that far behind Hong Kong. And then again, we have Monaco, very rich city, floating in at 89-year life expectancy, with the second highest GDP per capita in the world. So you can start to see a picture forming. And it's worth noting across the board, reports on Monaco's diet read a bit like this. Most people in Monaco eat a typical Mediterranean diet with an emphasis on whole foods, plenty of fresh fruit and vegetables, nuts, whole grains, and lean sources of protein prepared with olive oil, so not a ton of butter. And this health effect of wealth is pretty shocking, especially in the US, where it does affect access to healthcare. Looking at men and women, we're seeing a really dramatic stratification of your life expectancy based off how much you make. I mean, we're talking about being rich enough equaling living to 90, basically. On average, of course. And then we have a few more points I'll just rapid fire go through. First of all, they have nice weather, so you're not going to have all of those deaths from exposure that you have in cold climates. There's also a theory of fitness leading to migration, so you had healthier people going to Hong Kong as economic migrants. And finally, they rank super high for their built environment being pedestrian accessible and a healthy place to live in terms of staying mobile for older people. They even have those little workout parks for old people. All right, before we get into the meat and longevity data in general, let's hit on Vegan Strong really quickly. The Vegan Strong team includes a bunch of amazing athletes such as Robert Cheek, who has, as he says, put over 100 pounds on his frame since going vegan. All right, I got the Vegan Strong box right here. Pretty good size, 20 plus products, $150 worth of value for $49.99 minus $5 if you use Mike the Vegan at checkout, MIC the Vegan. And yeah, it's pretty heavy. They say it comes with a workout every month, and I think it involves lifting the box. Let's open it up. Okay guys, I unpacked the December box and it covers an entire table, pretty epic. Got a couple drinks like an oat milk nitro cold brew latte. We've got some crumbles, some tea, some chips, a couple bars, Dandy's vegan marshmallows. If you haven't made s'mores in a while as a vegan, that's the best way to do it. They've got a arm-shaped cookie cutout. They've got a Vegan Strong cup. They've got a bunch of coupons and stuff. This Vegan Strong booklet that has a ton of good recipes and stuff and good information in it. And then we also have maca powder, which by the way is really good for things like hormones. So looking pretty good. Yes, I am affiliatizing this box relationship. I was not able to make the Vegan Strong team because I'm not buff enough, but your purchase of it still goes to supporting me too. All right, now let's look at more research on meat and longevity. Right off the bat, looking to other cultures. The ones that eat the most meat have the lowest life expectancy. Unfortunately, looking to those northern tribes like the Inuit who live about 10 years shorter than the surrounding population. Obviously, it's meat and exposure to extreme temperatures and socioeconomic status, but it's not looking good for the support of meat. And from this study of 500,000 people on meat and mortality, they conclude that red and processed meat intakes were associated with modest increases in total mortality, cancer mortality, and CVD mortality. Looking at red meat in particular, which is not even as carcinogenic as processed meat, both carcinogens though, we're talking about a 30% increased mortality for high versus low consumption. We're talking 20% increased cancer death, 25 to 50% increased cardiovascular death for men and women respectively. So, ouch. As a variable in actual studies, yes, meat does not look good in terms of longevity. And this is where we have to ask, how much meat is Hong Kong actually eating? There's no doubt that they're eating a larger amount, but where do they actually land? Well, Beef Magazine, of course, puts them at the highest, up around nearly 700 grams a day, which is like almost Carnivore Diet level. Of course, they didn't actually cite anything for that figure, but throughout the article, they randomly highlight text that you would think might lead to a citation, but actually leads you to an endless labyrinth of pseudoscientific propaganda. The highest published number that I could find was from this paper actually calling for Hong Kong to lower their meat consumption for their environmental footprint. And they said it was around about 500 grams, which was their estimate. They cite this report, which is just a trade document, not a consumption document, which is valid for environmental impact, but doesn't account for food waste, which is up to 40% of total food in the city. So we could be more in the 300 gram a day range of what is actually consumed by people, a number directly comparable to the US and other Western countries. The only other one I could fully trace in the published literature is from this 2019 study in the Journal of Hydrology. Again, talking about the environmental effects, which cites a paper on consumption in the 2000s, which again matches right up with the US in the 300 gram range. So this sort of raises a lot of questions about how much meat these people are actually eating. You know, what were the actual samples that were taken when figuring out meat consumption? You know, did they get their samples from corporations where they might have a lot of young professionals who are striving to eat a more Western diet to elevate their status, which would inflate the numbers? Either way, we know that the younger Hong Kong population is not eating like the older Hong Kong population, which we would get life expectancy numbers from this study that looked at the Mediterranean diet score of various people, including younger versus older Hong Kongers, and it was clear that older Hong Kongers had a higher Mediterranean diet score, and it even called for younger Hong Kongers to have nutritional education to lower their disease risk. So regardless of the variation in meat consumption figures, we can just grant that, yeah, they do eat a ton of meat, and then ask what else could be describing this. And there's one factor here, or one pattern that could explain it, and that could be that there has been a rapid rise in meat consumption in the younger population that does not reflect what the older generation ate throughout their lives. And if our world in data is to be trusted, the patterns of meat consumption over time really reflect that, no, these people who have high life expectancies that are older now were not eating a ton of meat anywhere near what is being eaten today. I mean, pork consumption has more than tripled since 1960. Beef consumption doubled just from 2000 to 2012, which is insane. And the funny thing here is that the same meat longevity argument can be made with sugar and longevity. I mean, look, sugar consumption since the 60s has doubled, so clearly it fuels longevity. And here's your headline using the same logic. Hong Kong sugar intake doubles, life expectancy reaches #1 in the world. The point here is that life expectancy is determined by a lifetime of diet and lifestyle decisions. I mean, the average person who's 85 in Hong Kong right now, hitting that life expectancy mark, well, they were probably eating about 1/3 as much meat throughout their entire life as the average consumption in Hong Kong is today. Then again, by contrast, you have those younger Hong Kongers that are eating more meat. And I normally don't cite Quora, but if it's just an expert saying something, I might as well share it. This is from a medical professional at the Chinese University of Hong Kong on the topic. Referring to meat, they say, "I will not equate any relationship to long life with that. The ones who are living long and making the statistics did not have the meat consumption in their 20s to 60s as it is rampant now. Young Hong Kongers are getting sick earlier." So what will be the result of this? I think, unfortunately, inevitably, there's going to be a heart disease delay that's going to catch up with this whole population of younger people. So it might hit Hong Kong in like 2030 or the 2040s. I mean, right now, Hong Kong's leading cause of death isn't heart disease. I unfortunately think that's going to change. Heart disease, of course, takes a while to develop at a societal level. You have to slowly clog those arteries over time. And one example of this is actually what I refer to as the French butter lag. Low carbers would often cite France's higher butter consumption, higher saturated fat consumption, and lower heart disease rates as a reason for why Ansel Keys' diet heart hypothesis was bunk. We later found out that they were not just underreporting their heart disease deaths to begin with, but they also had a relatively recent adoption of high saturated fat from butter relative to the original studies. And once time went on, society caught up, arteries caught up, they just went right back in line with that saturated fat heart disease trend. And in terms of Hong Kong, as this Hong Kong insurance company states, however, as the Western diet gains popularity, more and more processed food and meat consumption have led to increases in diseases such as heart disease and high blood pressure in young people. In other words, people who aren't going to affect the life expectancy are starting to get those diseases earlier than perhaps their parents did. They continue with how childhood obesity is on the rise, which will, of course, have a negative effect in the future. And furthermore, colorectal cancer has overtaken lung cancer to become the most common cancer in Hong Kong, which they say is often related to diet, of course. Who would have thought that as a colorectal carcinogen increases like this, colorectal cancer would increase as well? And just to back that, as this paper on Hong Kong longevity mentions, in the past few years, there's been an increasing prevalence of some chronic diseases among younger groups, which has actually halted the improvement in life expectancy, though it hasn't horribly affected things yet. And then from the Hong Kong Health Department directly, coronary heart disease is increasing, especially among young people. So again, unfortunately, just because of the way the human lifespan works, we're probably going to see a delay, and we're probably going to see Hong Kong go the way of Okinawa unless they change their habits sooner than later. And of course, Okinawa was at the top of those charts, ate a super plant-based diet, ton of those sweet potatoes, fiber, etc., changed to a Western diet, and then plummeted in terms of life expectancy off the charts. In the end, there's absolutely no reason to point to meat as Hong Kong's secret to longevity, somehow against all of the blue zones that are low meat consumption. And of course, the studies on 500,000 people showing that higher meat intake was associated with higher mortality from various diseases and overall mortality. And while there seems to be some questions about the exact amount that Hong Kongers actually eat in terms of meat, it's clear that even if they're eating high meat today, these people who are setting these life expectancy numbers by dying now in their 80s were not the ones that were eating this level of meat throughout their whole life. They were probably eating about 1/3 as much. And if they're eating less meat, they were of course eating more plants, like the real winner here, which is Monaco at 89 years, which again, is largely contributable to how much money they have. These cities are very wealthy compared to other countries. And then when you add on the amazing healthcare system and built environment of Hong Kong, no, people should not be adopting high meat consumption to live longer. It's only going to be way worse for the environment, which those scientists were warning about, and of course, really bad for the animals. Finally, if you want to make it rain vegan snacks, get that vegan strong box. Again, my code is MIC the vegan, all one word, for that $5 off. Now, and whether it's going to arrive by Christmas is going to depend on your location and when you order it, but I will just say, based off the season, we should not be assuming that anything will arrive by Christmas. Maybe think of it as more of like a New Year's jumpstart. All right, that's it for today. Let me know what you think about all of this Hong Kong meat stuff, and perhaps you know more about Hong Kong than me, and you might have some insights either way. So let us know in the comments below. Again, feel free to like and subscribe, do all that good stuff, slap some notification bells, caress that notification. I don't know. Thanks for watching.